Welcome to the Cynical Centrist podcast, episode number 10. For July 27th, 2019, I am the Cynical Centrist. Made it through 10 shows, everybody. I'm actually surprised myself. I didn't expect to make it this far. But, hey, it is what it is. Today, it's going to be very election-heavy. We're going to be talking about an election scenario voted on by you, the fans. I had put up a poll on Twitter, and on that poll, I had 4 candidates, 4 possibilities of who I would try to analyze to face Donald Trump. I had Joe Biden, John Delaney, Elizabeth Warren, and Marianne Williamson. And in that poll, we had a tie, so it was between Warren and Williamson. We had a runoff between the two. And turns out that most of you, well, an overwhelming number of you, wanted Marianne Williamson versus Donald Trump. And I have that for you on the middle end of this show today. But first, I wanted to talk about something that has been on my mind the last week and a half. A couple people have been asking me why my analyses of the Poor People's Campaign and the debates involved so much showmanship, and why I had put showmanship as much, if not more, of a factor than substance, even though I am very much a substance guy. And, well, I would like to refer you all to what happened earlier this week, and that is with Robert Mueller. And when he went to go testify in front of Congress, what did cable news talk about at the end of it? Well, I'll tell you what they were talking about. They were not talking about what Robert Mueller said, but they talked about how Robert Mueller acted. Now, yes, I find it a particularly dumb idea to base the impeachment of a president on whether or not one guy was entertaining or not to people. But if you looked at cable news, if you looked at all the talk show hosts and what they were talking about, the main point of the story, they were not talking about if whether or not Donald Trump had colluded with Russia to win the presidential election, or should I say Donald Trump's campaign colluded with Russia, or whether or not his offenses are impeachable or not, based on the Mueller report. Everything was based on 2 things: how many viewers viewed this congressional hearing with Robert Mueller, and how Robert Mueller acted. And because of this, Donald Trump, at least any chance of impeachment for Donald Trump, has pretty much fizzled. Think about this for a second. We are basing the chances of Donald Trump being impeached or not based on how entertaining the guy who is prosecuting Donald Trump is. Not on the substance, not on any actions done, but on how entertaining the entire congressional hearing is. Please do not tell me anymore that showmanship is not a factor in presidential debates or in the election trail altogether, because it's pretty clear to the casual viewer, and not to the election junkie, but to the casual viewer, that all they saw from cable news was Robert Mueller was boring, and therefore Donald Trump is not going to be impeached because of that. Yes, this is dumb. Now, I am of the belief that it's too much of a waste of time at this point to impeach Donald Trump when you have an easier opportunity by getting rid of him in an election rather than trying to rely on 20 Republicans to turncoat him. But basing on whether or not you impeach a president or an elected official of any sort, based on how boring his prosecutor is really asinine. This has all but confirmed to me that politics is little more than a sport for people too old to play sports. We don't even talk about the issues anymore in politics. We talk about how fancy someone is or how well of a showman that they are. I'm now inclined to believe that showmanship isn't as important as substance anymore in the election debates. I think it is more important than substance in elections and debates. Yes, you will have those independent-minded thinkers who will look at something and look at the issues and see what issues that they like best. But for the vast majority of people in politics, on both sides of the aisle, it is pretty much a sports game. It's rooting for your home team and hoping that they win. And that's just ridiculous, that we are basing someone's campaign life on whether or not someone is entertaining. So when I talk about my bubble watch, which I got off of college basketball bracketology, I seriously consider politics a sport. That's the reason why I call it a bubble watch. And by the way, we're going to talk about the bubble watch too in a little bit. Also, when we talk about the reviews of debates and whatnot, I'm going to look at, and I will put more of a factor into, how well that they looked in that debate, the overall feeling, and how the audience responded to people in that debate, or whatever forum that they are in, like the Poor People's Campaign Forum. Because at the end of the day, that is what we are looking at. The casual listener is probably only going to look at one or two issues, and that's about it. They are then going to look at, okay, which of those candidates will meet those issues best, and then they're going to see which of those candidates they think is the strongest to beat Trump. Now, it's the other way around as well for Republicans, except, Donald Trump is really the only choice. I know Bill Weld is primarying him, but he has no chance of winning. We all know this. Donald Trump will probably get like 90% of the votes and almost all of the delegates, so you can pretty much write off Bill Weld. But I will say that it's going to come down to who is the most entertaining, who the mainstream media likes the most. And to the media, you hear them, it's basically a 4, maybe 5-man race, 5-person race, until they say otherwise. To them, it's down to Biden, Sanders, Warren, Harris, and Buttigieg. You might have some outside from Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, Andrew Yang. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to those 5 right now, unless someone really makes a jump in the next debate. And now, after everyone has seen what they thought of Robert Mueller and how he testified before Congress, I can now confirm to you showmanship is the most important thing in these elections. So with that being said, let's get to the bubble watch. Going to repeat what I said last week, I did make the bubble watch a little bit more discreet. I based it based on a point system. There are 2 criteria that the Democrat National Committee has put into the candidates for them to qualify for the September debate. The first one, which I have put weighted as 2 points, is the number of donors. And that is something that all candidates can control if they can gather up 130,000 unique donors. So 65,000 donors earns you 1 point. Now, the second criteria is something a little bit more out of their control, so I weighted it a little bit more, 4 points in fact, is the number of polls in which they score 2% or higher, and it must be a qualifying poll. And I'm not going to go through all the different qualifying polls, but you can pretty much be assured that a lot of the mainstream media polls are part of that. Combined, 2 plus 4 makes 6 points. If you get 6 points, you are qualified for the September debate. And for the rest of them, they are on the bubble. And we do have a couple updates to talk about on this. So let's first start talking about the locks at 6 points right now. We have Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, and just added this week, Beto O'Rourke now officially qualifies with his 4th 2% poll. Sitting at 5 points, Cory Booker still kind of dangling in there at 5 points. And Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar actually got her 4th poll, so all she needs is another 20,000 donors, and she will qualify for September. And she will become the 7th person to qualify for September. Sitting at the 4-point column, we have Julian Castro and Andrew Yang. Both of these candidates already have the 2 points needed with the donors, and they have 2 polls needed of the 4 to qualify. Andrew Yang just getting his 3% on Fox News earlier, and Julian Castro, I think, got his right after I recorded my last podcast last week. We have no one in the 3-point column, so we're going to move on to the 2-point column, and there are 2 people on this list right now. Tulsi Gabbard has over 65,000 donors, so that's her 1 point there, and she also has a greater than 2% on 1 poll. Tom Steyer, the other 2-point candidate, is sitting at 2% on 2 polls, but he still has, well, he probably doesn't have enough donors. He literally just started his campaign. But you can tell with the amount of money that he's putting into it, he is going to push hard to get to September. I mean, already he has leapfrogged a lot of the 1-point candidates, and we'll get to them in a little bit. But already tied with Tulsi Gabbard on this bubble watch is amazing. And it might be by next week he'll pass Tulsi Gabbard and probably start knocking on the doors of Julian Castro and Andrew Yang. Who knows? A lot of it will also come down to the debates, of which Tom Steyer is not a part of. But he's looking to get himself into September more than anything else. And finally, we have 5 guys in the 1-point column, and I'm not talking about the burger joint. Technically, we're talking about 3 men and 2 women here, too, not really 5 guys. Kirsten Gillibrand, Mike Gravel, Jay Inslee, Marianne Williamson, and John Hickenlooper polled 2% in that Fox News poll, ensuring him 1 point. So congratulations to John Hickenlooper, Tom Steyer, Andrew Yang, and Amy Klobuchar, and Julian Castro, all for gaining points this week. And also a definite congratulations to Beto O'Rourke for locking in a qualification spot. The number of candidates that I have predicted that will make it to September is currently 10. Andrew Yang is currently the last person in. The first person out is Tulsi Gabbard, and the next person out is Tom Steyer. And that is pretty much it for the Bubble Watch, so let's talk about the debates. The second round of the presidential debates will start on July 30th. That's just a few days from now. And it's going to be another 2-night affair with 20 candidates. The exact same 20 candidates with one exception. Eric Swalwell did recently drop out, so replacing him will be Steve Bullock. So yeah, they will take place July 30th and 31st. CNN will be hosting it this time, and it will take place in Detroit. The lineup is as follows. For night 1, we have Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke, Steve Bullock, Tim Ryan, John Hickenlooper, John Delaney, and Marianne Williamson. And for night 2, we have Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Julian Castro, Andrew Yang, Michael Bennet, Bill de Blasio, Tulsi Gabbard, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Jay Inslee. Now let's talk about what possible strategies we could see during these debates. My first big interest in night 1 is that a lot of the mainstream media think that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren should go after each other. But considering how ideologically similar they are, as I understand it, they are the first 2 candidates to have a discrete student loan forgiveness plan, for example, I do think that they should form a sort of temporary alliance against everyone else instead of going at each other for this debate. Now, this would especially be good against the more establishment candidates like Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke. These 3 in particular are starting to turn some heads. I would say John Hickenlooper as well, because he just recently got 2% in a Fox News poll, which actually put him on the board in the Bubble Watch at 1 point. But I do think that their main focus is going to have to be sinking Klobuchar, Beto, and Buttigieg, especially Klobuchar, since Klobuchar is not a lock yet. But I don't see why Sanders and Warren should fight each other. They're way too similar. And they have plenty of time to go at each other over what little differences they do have later on in debates when the field whittles down a little bit. So right now, this should be their chance to lock thinning the field, so to speak. For Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke, and the others, I mean, at this point, it's all about just getting to September. And this is where Pete and Beto have an advantage. They can basically coast at this point. I mean, they don't really have to do much other than don't completely flub the debate, which shouldn't be very hard to do, but Beto O'Rourke did, in fact, really hurt himself in that first debate by just randomly speaking Spanish. We'll see if he does that again. If he does, he might as well drop out at this point. I mean, it was an obviously pandering stunt that just did not work out. So I'm hoping that Beto is smart enough to at least try to make up for that horrible first debate performance. Now for Amy Klobuchar, she's in a more peculiar position right now because she has not completely qualified yet. She still needs donors. I believe another 20,000 or so at the time of this recording. So for her, she's going to want to try to grab votes from another moderate or centrist candidate like a John Hickenlooper or John Delaney, who would be willing to put down $1 for her campaign. Now, the rest of the field, the more bottom tier candidates, this is pretty much do or die for them. A lot of them I feel like shouldn't even be here at this point and likely will drop out. The only one of the other candidates that I think could be a possible wild card here, a lot of people say Steve Bullock just because he wasn't at the first debate. I do want to see what he's like, and he seems a little bit more interesting because he was left out of that first debate. But to me, the wild card in night one is probably going to be Marianne Williamson. Now, I know we're going to talk about Marianne Williamson in a little bit in my general election scenario versus Donald Trump, but I will say this. She has one thing a lot of the other lower tier candidates like your Delaney's, your Hickenloopers, even your Michael Bennetts don't. And that one thing is passion. Yes, she lacks a lot of substance. No doubt about it. But we've talked about how Robert Mueller was being judged based on how boring he was, and how the mainstream media, and I'm not just talking about Fox News either, I'm talking cable news like CNN, MSNBC, and the like, how they were going to base whether or not Trump should be impeached on how many people watched the TV ratings and how boring he is. So yes, that kind of passion, regardless of the lack of substance or not, is going to be very important. And I do think that Marianne Williamson has the potential to make some gains as long as she keeps that tone, that passionate tone that she has that a lot of people like about her. I also think a lot of people underestimate her wit, her intelligence as well. Now, is she in my top 5? No. There are a lot of things about her that I vehemently disagree with, the biggest one being her hesitance towards vaccines for children. But overall, do I think that she could make gains here? Yes, I really do think she could make gains here, especially if she can get those celebrity endorsements after the debate, the celebrity connections that she does have. You could see her make some serious gains. And she is going to need it if she wants to continue being out there on a national stage. She is currently sitting at 1 point on the bubble watch right now. She has 1 point for the donors. I think she's at like 85, 90,000 donors right now. She could possibly get the number of donors needed and meet that requirement, but she still needs 2% polls. And that is where she's going to have some difficulty in. On to night 2, the top story here, Biden caught between a rock and a hard place. Basically, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, 2 candidates that will likely strike at Joe Biden for his working with segregationists, are on either side of him. That is not going to end well, guys. Now, Kamala Harris has already done her work in the first debate, so she might possibly back off a little bit. Cory Booker will not. And you can almost guarantee that Harris and Booker will form an alliance to try to take Biden down on the working with segregationists issue, the issue with busing. So expect that to happen during the debates. Now, the other dark horse that I see here is Andrew Yang. Now, Andrew Yang and Julian Castro are both in the same boat right now. And they're actually in the same night as well. They are both sitting at 4 points. They both have the required amount of donors needed to continue on to the September debates, but they are still missing 2 polls. If you count the NBC Survey Monkey poll, they only need 1 poll to advance to September. But I'm not counting it, so I'm going to say they both need 2 polls. Now, with Julian Castro, he's going to be a little bit further away from the stage. Andrew Yang is going to be a little bit closer to the front. I think part of that is because he is currently polling higher than Julian Castro is. So I think that Andrew Yang should take advantage of the fact that despite being near the front, very few know his policies. He is very different, and very few can really counter his policies right now. So he should take advantage of this and remain stealthy and just talk about getting his name out, talk about who he is, what his policies are. I really think if he pushes the human-centered capitalism part of things, that a lot of people will wake up to it, at least enough to me, that we will see a 1 to 2% bump for Andrew Yang in that sense. And I know there's been this big Twitter fight going on right now between Yang supporters and Bernie supporters over which candidate should keep going, and why Yang supporters are racist according to Bernie supporters, and Bernie supporters why they are delusional or socialist. And look, I actually have both Andrew Yang and Bernie Sanders in my top 5. And the reason why is because, and even though I am a moderate, I have them both in my top 5 because despite having progressive policies, I feel like their policies make the most sense out of all the candidates here. I might be centrist, but I'm not a corporatist. And I will take bias towards those that are anti-corporate. Well, I shouldn't say anti-corporate, anti-amalgamation of corporations, anti-super corporations, I should say, rather than those who want to keep the status quo to a system that is clearly not working. People like your Delaney's and your Hickenloopers and even your Joe Bidens. They both talk about the exact same problem, that the system as it stands now is messed up for most Americans. The difference, and the main difference, if you want to decide whether or not you want to vote for Andrew Yang or Bernie Sanders, ask yourself this question. Do I think capitalism works? The fundamentals of capitalism, do they still work? If your answer is yes, then your best candidate is probably Andrew Yang, who basically just wants to give capitalism a much-needed tune-up with $1,000 a month with UBI, but more importantly, wanting to switch the metrics around so that it focuses more on quality of life of people. If your answer is no, or it needs to be radically changed, then yes, your answer is probably going to be wanting to vote for Bernie Sanders. I mean, he has a lot of policies that are very democratic socialists in nature. For example, free college, complete student loan debt forgiveness, a federal job guarantee, wanting to raise the minimum wage to European-style levels, the Green New Deal, and so on and so forth. It really should not be on which candidate is going to give you more. It should be based on a deep philosophical, analytical kind of thinking. But I digress. Other candidates of note that I think could do pretty well during this debate, Bill de Blasio did pretty well in the first debate, although he didn't really make too many gains off of it. Because of his vast dislike, though, in New York, I don't see him getting much further. Tulsi Gabbard might have a chance, though, and she's actually on the board herself. She has 65,000 plus donors. She has 2% poll right now, and she is one heck of a debater. So you could see her probably trying to be a little bit more aggressive, because for her, she is one of the candidates that could possibly make a serious jump and move on to September. Who knows? As of right now, I don't have her on it, but anything could happen after the 30th and 31st. So that's going to be it for the debates. We will talk more about the review of the debates next week. And also, that is where I am hoping I can finish up getting my upgrades. I actually had some serious issues this week that prevented me from getting those upgrades done, but I promise I plan to get those upgrades done this week. A couple of those things, I plan to have a Discord channel up. I plan to start a topic of discussion on Twitter. And I also am going to get a voice layover done. So all of that should be done by next week. Now it's time to give some special thanks to Audionautics.com. Audionautics.com actually came up with the opening song that I have grabbed from them. Audionautics.com, check out thousands of songs there for your podcast or advertisement, Audionautics.com. And also my good friend Pulsar over at Pulsar Radio, spinning new alternative, indie, rock, punk, metal, hardcore, and more. And he also talks about anime, wrestling, hockey, nerd culture, and more. Now on Wednesdays, 6 to 9 p.m. Pacific, 9 to midnight Eastern, and Fridays, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific, 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Tune in at radiovegas.rocks and download the app for free for iPhone and Android. All right, time for the main event, and that is the general election scenario. The battle of the pro-B candidates If you saw my tweet a couple days ago, yeah, these two actually had the two most donations from beekeepers. 2 weeks ago, I talked about Andrew Yang versus Donald Trump, and it came out to Andrew Yang coming out with a 1-2 state pad victory. And the big surprise being that Andrew Yang has the best chance of any Democrat candidate to turn Georgia blue, partially because of the tech hub hotspot that is Atlanta, as well as the increasingly high above average Asian population there compared to its surrounding states like Alabama, Florida, and North Carolina. And as you can hear, I was able to pick up enough information on Andrew Yang by just looking at tweets and having to look really hard at certain news sites to come up with a scenario where Andrew Yang would face Donald Trump as of right now. But the information was there. It's a little different with Marianne Williamson. I can't find any information on Marianne Williamson, and part of that is because she has remained a bottom-tier candidate. In Yang's case, he started from the bottom, started early, and has been working his way up to now being anywhere between 6th through 8th in the polls as of right now, whereas Marianne Williamson started a little bit later and is currently flopping somewhere in the, I want to say middle of the pack, but that's still technically bottom tier, where I think she's currently 15th or 16th right now, according to Real Clear Politics polls. I'm not quite sure, but she does wildly go between like top 12 to like near last place, depending on who you ask and where you ask. So there is very little information about her because of that. A lot of people don't see her as a serious candidate. And that's part of the reason why I had put up a Google form throughout the week and asked people which states Trump could win and which states that Williamson could win. And we're going to talk about that. And I didn't completely go based on voters because a lot of the voters were heavily biased towards one candidate. But I did take that into consideration when I was looking at certain states. And I think I came up with possibly the most accurate scenario as of right now of a Marianne Williamson versus Donald Trump general election scenario. But before we get to that, let's talk about what advantages that Marianne Williamson has and what disadvantages that she has. The theme of this episode has been that showmanship matters in politics, and Marianne Williamson has that in spades. She shows a lot of passion in her speech, great showmanship, and is one of the few candidates I feel can match Trump in showmanship and being able to capture that casual viewer who wants to vote but isn't quite sure who to vote for, and possibly even exceed him in that category. A second thing, too, is that she has a lot of celebrity connections, and those endorsements, even though they're a little bit hesitant to support her right now in the primary, at least for the moment, they will almost certainly turn out in a general election, especially against a candidate like Donald Trump, where a lot of Hollywood really does not like him right now. She can also better capture a large demographic, that being the white females, than most other candidates, and also she is pretty strong and very centered, focused on social issues. You notice this by wanting to talk about creating a Department of Peace, for example. Now, the main disadvantages. The first thing is that a lot of her crowd comes from states that are already pretty solidly blue. Mainly the New England states like Vermont, New York, California, as well in the Pacific side, California, Oregon, Washington. The only states that I can see her doing better in than other Democratic candidates, than most other Democratic candidates, would be the states like New Hampshire and Maine. Now, those places could probably turn blue, and Trump will probably not win any electoral votes, especially out of New Hampshire, but also in Maine, probably might not win Maine's 2nd district. She's also not really strong on the hard numbers of the economy and foreign policy. Now, I know she has a couple issues about that in her Marianne2020.com website. However, she does not talk about them very much. She talks a lot about social issues. And as if I were just listening to the TV and I just knew her based on the debate and the Poor People's Campaign Forum, there are two main things that she wants to push: slave reparations and creating a Department of Peace, which constitutes to wanting to fight off conservatives with love rather than hate. And that is not a lot of substance for a candidate who has a lot of potential to me. I'm not going to say that she's in my top 5, like I said earlier. However, I do think that she does have a lot of potential with her celebrity connections, with her passion in speaking, and how well she could potentially do in debates, that she could be a dangerous candidate. This also not to mention that slave reparations, while a great strategy, at least to me, is an awesome strategy to be supporting and to be pushing in a Democratic primary with the demographics that you know are going to vote for you. Not so much in the general, though. And if she keeps pushing that, she could scare off voters, especially the more independent-minded voters who might be thinking that slave reparations, it's not helping out everybody. It's not even targeting all black people, that ethnicity. It's targeting just specific people, descendants of slavery. And slavery ended from somewhere around 150 years ago. So a lot of independents are probably thinking like, these are great, great, great grandparents that we're talking about here. It has been 4, 5, 6 generations since then. So I'm not saying it's right or anything, but independents are probably thinking, it's time to get over it or something like that. So that's one big issue. But the bigger elephant in the room is that there are reports out there that talk about that Marianne Williamson is very hesitant, or at least a skeptic, of mandatory vaccines for children. This is going to be a very huge problem. Now, do I think it's going to be something that could cause problems against Donald Trump? Well, they do have one strategy that they could use against Donald Trump, and that is remind people that he also was hesitant of vaccines to possibly cancel it out. But it also shows a really bad judgment on Marianne Williamson's part. And having her coming out as that sort of new age, astrology, spiritual kind of person, being the spiritual advisor, I think, for Oprah or something like that, that can be problematic for her, especially in a general election against more independent-minded voters. Now, against Democrats, that's different. And to me, I think she can actually get herself in the race as soon as she gets those celebrity endorsements in, so she better get those in quickly or drop out. But in a general election, celebrity endorsements, especially Democratic celebrity endorsements, are going to be a little bit less effective, especially against more independent-minded voters. And it does come down to how the independents are going to look at her. Now, I said before in my Trump versus Yang scenario, I felt like independents would overall act favorably toward Andrew Yang because his policies are very different, and independent-minded thinking people on both sides of the aisle are willing to try something new, especially the younger crowd like millennials. Marianne Williamson's message is a lot more clear and a lot more simple, and a lot of independent-minded people are going to be a little bit more turned off by it. Not because it's a bad message per se, but because a lot of it seems very unreasonable. The idea of a Department of Peace, less war, and focusing more on social issues and being more, happy-pappy, more new agey, a more spiritual kind of thing. Now, some might open up to the idea, but I do feel like that if you put it down between Williamson versus Trump, who would be more rational, I think more independent people will think Donald Trump. I think that she's one of the few candidates that more people would think Trump is more rational than her on. It's going to be a little bit different to me with candidates like, I'm not going to even mention Andrew Yang in this, but candidates like even Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, who might be more socialist, but they're a lot more rational and they reason out their policies better than someone like Marianne Williamson, who's all passion but no substance, as I had mentioned before. So with that being said, let's talk about the actual election itself. Now, a reminder, this is as of if the election happened today, and if Marianne Williamson was about as well known as Joe Biden at this point. I am not looking at any other factors right now. Obviously, things will change as time goes on. but this is just as of right now. I researched this and created my map based on 3 different factors. The first factor being how each state is like, its culture, its demographics, its makeup. The second being election trends in that state. And finally, third being how you guys voted on Google. And I will say this, be very thankful that I did not put all of the factor on how people voted. Otherwise, this would have been a far more brutal election result for Marianne Williamson than it already was. She would actually be losing some deeply blue states, according to my voters, and I really think that was a little bit of bias on the parts of a lot of the people that voted in this Google form that I have. A good number of you guys voted. I'd say about 45. Yeah, about 45 voted. And just to give you an example of the bias here, it's almost a 50-50 tie, but Trump would just win out the state of Connecticut and the state of New Jersey. So I had to take those out of the equation and kind of do a little bit of algorithms on this to kind of even things out and create a slightly more realistic scenario to me. Spoiler alert, it still doesn't entirely look all that great. So I'm going to start with the solids, the solid states. We'll start with Donald Trump, who has 155 solid electoral votes. He would gather solid double-digit victories in the states of Alaska, Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, all of Nebraska except for District 2, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas would go back to being solid from likely 4 years ago, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and South Carolina. Marianne Williamson would pick up 162 solid electoral votes, winning the states of Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, California, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. No real surprises here except I had Texas as a plus 10 for Trump against Williamson, but that isn't really too much of a surprise. Trump is likely going to win regardless of who the candidate is. He might be having somewhat of a competition if he had to face Beto O'Rourke or maybe Julian Castro. But in the case of Marianne Williamson, it's probably going to be solid, if not likely, Trump. Let's move on to the likely states. These are where either candidate wins by at least 5 points, but less than 10 points. For Donald Trump, I have 40 electoral votes. The states of North Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana. Yes, I actually have Louisiana plus 9 for Trump, not plus 10. So that will put it into the likely column. And Nebraska District 2, which I have as a plus 7. Now for Marianne Williamson, I have 34 electoral votes. The states that she would get is Illinois, same thing, plus 9 to Williamson, Colorado, New Hampshire, and Maine District 1 for a grand total of 34 electoral votes. So one big surprise here, Illinois being likely. Part of that is because of the Google votes. I guess a lot of the voters think that more Republicans would turn out in Illinois for something like that. I'm not entirely sure. The other big surprise being the state of New Hampshire, going from being a lean state and usually one that is purple to being one that solidly and likely will go to Marianne Williamson without a fight, mainly because she does seem to perform better in states like New Hampshire and Maine. So that's it for the likely states. Moving on to the lean states, and we have a grand total of 147 electoral votes left to talk about. So let's talk about the main elephant in the room here, and that is that most of the 147 electoral votes that are leaning is going to go to Donald Trump. In the lean Trump category, I have 84 electoral votes. Florida, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and that is 84 electoral votes, and that will put him over 270. I think that actually puts him at 279, which is just enough for him to win back the presidency without any more states, and he would be reelected for a second term. Now, with Marianne Williamson, the number of electoral votes that are leaning, 15. 2 states only, Maine at large and Virginia. And yeah, I know that seems kind of interesting, but a lot of it, I think a lot of the voters felt like it came down to independent-minded voters and how the voters are like. Like, she would do better in states like Maine, New Hampshire, Washington, and Oregon. But when it comes down to those purple states where they're more the working class, can she do well there? And I'm going to talk about what is the one possible way that Marianne Williamson could win election over Donald Trump in a little bit. I do want to get to the tilts. 41 electoral vote tilt for Donald Trump. He would win the states of Iowa, Pennsylvania, and then pick up Minnesota and New Mexico. And with Marianne Williamson, she would get 20 tilt electoral votes. That is Maine District 2. That would be a pickup for her. Nevada. Actually, I'm sorry. That would be a grand total of 7. I actually had to change that map here. It's going to be Maine District 2 and Nevada will be tilt for Williamson. For a grand total, Donald Trump, 320 electoral votes. Marianne Williamson, 218. Now, what could Marianne Williamson do in order to win this election? And the answer is pretty obvious. There needs to be a recession. Now, if there is a recession, then you will see a lot of the working class in states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania turn around and want to vote for Marianne Williamson. I do believe that myself and a lot of the people that were voting felt like that the Midwest is more economic-based than social-based. They want more economic solutions rather than social-based solutions. At least that's what their focus is over there. So, in a recession, I feel like they'll be more prone to taking a chance with a Democrat who might be a little bit more socially concentrated. Now, Marianne Williamson could do this and turn things around if she does focus more on the economy, because I do feel like the economy and progressive economics is key for the Democrats to win the election, regardless of the Democrat candidate. And social stuff like identity politics is a surefire way for the Democrat to lose to Donald Trump. So they should choose wisely in that sense. But yes, as it stands right now, Donald Trump would solidly beat Marianne Williamson and even pick up a few states. A few of them I was a little bit surprised too, after researching in all the votes, states like New Mexico. So that actually surprised me. And Minnesota, that one was also another big surprise. So that's going to be it for this show this week. Like I said, I will have some upgrades next week, and be sure to be on the lookout for that. If you want to check me out on Twitter, go check me out at Cynical Centrist. And yeah, come at me. If you disagree with me, let me know. Tell me what you think about this situation. I normally go off with something that's a little bit lighter, but since I am running short on time, I went ahead and retweeted a post of a kitty kissing the camera on my Twitter, so you can go check that out at Cynical Centrist, because kitties are adorable. All right, that is it for the Cynical Centrist this week. The debates, reviews next week, and very likely I will be talking about which candidates are going to make it and which ones won't. So until next time, if I'm not pissing you off, I'm not doing my job. Bye, everybody.